Greetings, students! There were an inordinate number of questions this week, 23 in fact, and we have hit another milestone as well, 2,000 followers on this YouTube. Thank you for spreading the word and subscribing to this channel. It is an honor to be lecturing in this ever-expanding hall. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our otherwise prepared content, and so for the next month or so, we'll be doing office hours only, every alternating week until our research has been completed for the next in our series of the other series entitled The Prism. Enough housekeeping, let's get to the questions. Silas Lelico asks, there are claims that since the last year and the current year, about 3,000 shipping containers fell on the ocean, mostly on the Pacific Ocean. The media says it's because of changes in the tides, but this seems odd to me. I'd like to hold this up as an example of a perfectly formed question. The seeming innocuousness of the topic is thrown into relief by the intuition of the questioner. It is not a topic that I've seen widely discussed elsewhere, but is rather something that catches the eye. Learning how to lean into this instinct to find the strange in what is marketed as normal is an absolutely essential psychic skill in this type of research. For this, Silas, I'm giving you an A+. Now to the shipping containers. The statistic is that 2020 saw about 3,000 shipping containers lost, and 1,000 in the first 4 months of 2021, continuing the trend. The previous decade saw an average of about 1,000 lost per year, which means that 2020 just about tripled the losses. The news sources that I read indicated that there were 3 factors influencing this. Increased demand from America, where lockdown has led people to buy online more. Increased ocean volatility from global warming, and stresses within logistics companies leading to overworked crews making poor decisions regarding safety, on both the low end of stacking and cabling, and on the high end of proceeding through storms. However, while chaos theory makes it easy for us to say, oh, there were several factors that influenced each other in microscopically complex ways that led to a feedback loop creating this particularly disastrous statistic, that seems to me to be a lazy, hand-waving, and ultimately boring approach to the data. I drilled down deeper. It looks like the data for the lost shipping containers is not as homogeneous as a gloss of the statistics would suggest. In 2013, particularly, there was an unexpected spike in shipping containers lost. There was no convenient global pandemic to explain away this oddity. Further research allowed us to assign an even more specific date to this anomaly. June 17th, 2013, the MOL Comfort wrecked, jettisoning 4,382 shipping containers. But for all this, we have been looking for a push, when in fact, we perhaps should have been looking for a pull. What personal forces might have an interest in sinking a cargo ship? Wikipedia defines a cargo cult as a millenarian belief system in which the adherents perform rituals which they believe will cause a more technologically advanced society to deliver goods. These religious organizations make prayers to individuals such as John Frum or John Navy in the hopes that they will send goods such as clothing or Coca-Cola floating to them over the ocean waves. There is one cargo cult in particular that I find interesting, the Prince Philip movement from the island of Tanna in Vanuatu. The deity from whom they request cargo is the former consort of Queen Elizabeth, Philip. They believe that the prince is a descendant of a local volcanic spirit, and that on his death, his soul will return to its spiritual home on the island of Tanna. Looking at a timeline of Philip's health, there is a period from 2008 to 2013 in which he undergoes multiple hospitalizations for various issues in his bladder and gut. These culminate in a trip to the hospital in 2013. The royal family absurdly insisted that this was a routine surgery and not a response to illness. He was admitted on June 6th and remained in the hospital until June 20th. The sinking of the MOL Comfort on June 17th happened just near the end of his stay. After the surgery, the prince was restored to health and managed to stay out of the hospital for most of his 90s, excepting a car crash that he miraculously survived at the beginning of 2019. However, On December 21st of 2019, he was readmitted for a pre-existing condition. Following his stay in the hospital, he made absolutely no appearance in public for at least 6 months, at which time his appearances were spotty at best, and marked for his cadaverous appearance. Directly after that hospital visit, of course, the Pacific Ocean was flooded with triple the cargo that it normally carries. Could it be that Prince Philip's spirit did in fact leave his body briefly in June of 2013 and more permanently on the eve of 2020 in order to fulfill the requests of the Melanesian worshippers and to tip shipping containers off of boats across the Pacific? Will this trend level off now that his spirit has no material basis? Or will it intensify as he is no longer shackled to his corporeal form? And what changes may be wrought in Prince Charles, now that he has become the object of veneration for this people? We must keep our eyes on this situation as it develops. Thank you again, Silas. Excellent question. Moving on. Patreon subscriber Dax asks, Professor, I recently came across this channel revolving around Reddit mysteries. Not a question per se, but I thought I'd bring it to your attention, as it may find a fit with other pieces of information you have available. Indeed, Dax, this channel is excellent. I've watched one of its videos, and I look forward to watching more and seeing what arises. The rest of you can consider it extra credit if you will go out and check out this channel, and I will put a link to it in the comments to this video. Surely, this will find its way into other topics that we discuss. Patreon subscriber Vicky G asks, It was brought to my attention that there is a document from a 2017 fictional pandemic scenario conducted by the Center for Health Security at Johns Hopkins University. Some think it is proof of the COVID-19 globalist plot. Is it just a coincidence? Are they already telling us what will happen? Your thoughts, good sir. More specifically, the linked document is a handbook on handling public health crises communications during a fictional pandemic set in the years 2025 to 2028. There are some compelling correspondences to future events. Page 2 states that the president in the year 2025 is Randall Archer, who was a vice president to President Jacqueline Bennett, who had been elected in 2020 and served only one term because of declining health conditions. Because this was written in 2017, we can assume that the 2020 president not being Donald Trump means that they are a Democrat. And at that point, the initials JB are especially interesting. Interesting, too, is what seems to me a fairly likely scenario of Joe Biden being too deteriorated to run for a second term in 2024, and the likelihood of him being replaced by his vice president. Furthermore, the ticket is correctly identified as a mixed-gender ticket, although the genders are flopped, i.e. Jacqueline Bennett, the Joe Biden stand-in, is female, whereas Randall Archer, the Kamala Harris stand-in, is male. However, there are other significant correlations as well. The fictional virus, SPARS, is, like COVID-19, a novel coronavirus with its origins in Asia. There is a symmetry to the fact that SPARS is named after its place of origin, St. Paul Acute Respiratory Syndrome, whereas COVID is named after its time of origin, 2019. But there are other coincidences that I find more troubling, especially one outlined on page 14. Here, they describe the chaos that ensued from releasing the initial case fatality rate of SPARS at 14%, and later adjusting that number to 5%, and later to 0.6%. The paper describes this process as an inevitable one of expanding the definition of detection for what constitutes a case of SPARS, and correctly identifies the public mistrust that releasing the early numbers engenders. As you can see from this graph from Our World in Data, the prediction was followed exactly by the organizations in question. The COVID official fatality rate was first predicted around 15% and then slowly revised down to about 0.5%. And these numbers were widely reported in reality as they were in the fictional pandemic. I am, unfortunately, left asking the same question I asked when I addressed the pandemic several videos ago. If the government knows effective communication strategies, why is it not using them? Why engage in the exact behavior which was already predicted to cause public disbelief in the virus? Earlier, I suggested that the powers that be may want to hoard the vaccines for themselves, but I am beginning to suspect that this is not the issue, but that they simply do not want those with the disease to seek a cure. Thank you, Vicky G, for bringing this paper to our attention. It is a harrowing and a frustrating read. Our next question comes from Patreon subscriber Elijah Ray, who asks, I have a question regarding timelines. It seems clear that the Illuminated ones have long held a veil of deception over the general public regarding the true cosmology of our realm, i.e., where we are. Intuitively, I sense that we have been equally deceived as to when we are, in time as well. Could the very same Illuminated ones who broke open the demonic seals and sent them pouring into the digital space via emojis, hijacked the minds of the population as seen in the Max Headroom PSYOP, also have figured out a way to hijack and insert themselves into various points along the timeline? A few threads led me to this consideration: the coordinated wiping out of any mention of Tartaria in the history books, the odd dates with an I instead of a 1 on many ancient texts, the many carvings of reptilian and bird-headed overlords depicting grafting the Tree of Life, such as on the big archway in Hollywood, all over Egypt and elsewhere. In most descriptions, they are seen with some sort of watches or time-keeping devices on their wrists. The Watchers wear watches, and some have figured out how to master time and splicing DNA like the mRNA vaccine currently in circulation. Could they be implanting themselves into the history whenever they wish, and or erasing entire genetic memory files and periods of history from our awareness? Are we in the midst of another such great reset/harvest? In a word, yes. Your question, Elijah, was very erudite, and I appreciate the detail with which you posed it. This has led me to articulate what I believe to be a summary of the Illuminated view of time. It is a perspective that I call everything all at once. We've touched on this in our recent discussion of holography, and I'd like to recap that metaphor here. The claim in the Gateway Process document that Bayman Woe brought to our attention recently is that if a pebble is dropped into a still lake, and the then rippling surface of the lake is flash frozen and removed, and a laser is then projected through the ripples caused on the lake's surface, they will act as a lens to focus the light, and a holographic reproduction of the pebble will appear below. The implication of this fact is that the complex interactions of waves of radiation throughout the universe could be reverse engineered to model any point in the past. The activity creates a record which can be perceived through certain wave analysis, the kind of wave analysis that a highly sophisticated information organ like the human brain might be sensitive to. This further implies to me that the much-touted heat death of the universe is actually an information death, a thought which deserves fuller pursuit in another context, perhaps. Electromagnetic waves are the focus of the holography discussion in the Gateway Process, but to me, it seems likely that they are principally interesting for reproduction of electromagnetic phenomena, i.e., images. This may have other implications because of the electromagnetic properties of thought and spirit, but those are not too relevant for where I want to take this discussion. Rather, I think that the process of holography is a useful metaphor for understanding the ways that our minds construct the world around us. The mind seems to me to be an essentially narrative organ, by contrast with the brain, which is electrochemical, and the weird space between the mind and brain, which bridges those gaps. DNA, as mentioned in your question, Elijah, is another holographic medium. It records history, and by the inflections of history, it derives its present identity. This, I think, is the core function of holography. This is why the illuminated vision of time is everything all at once, because the functional part of history, the parts of history that can change the present, are the ones that are encoded in the present moment and still active. But whereas the brain is electrochemical and DNA is fully chemical, the mind is narrative. This is why we perceive time as history, because history is a collection of stories. This is why I believe that the answer to your question is essentially yes. We have a very clear evidence of the propagandistic use of stories from even as porn-like and weak members of the Illuminati as Donald Rumsfeld. Whatever holograms are higher than the mind, I believe, are of increasing interest to the Illuminated chiefs who may have their seats there. But you may still count on their attempts at manipulation of the active resonances of the past, which may be currently affecting the present, whether those be as fundamental as electromagnetic waves, or as sophisticated as the understandings of the motivations of foreign nations. I'll piggyback the answer to another question onto this one, to wit, Jason Hand asked, since time is a construct, shouldn't we be able to overcome it? We've just gone into a good amount of detail on the illuminated concept of time, but I wanted to cover this explicitly as well. I believe that yes, to a large extent, the Illuminated project is to, quote-unquote, overcome time. Moreover, applying the lessons learned in the last question here, we might ask, just who constructed the streams of time whose lashes you resent? What history is haunting you? And is it, in fact, a genuine history? If you are suffering under an illuminated illusion, I hope that you may indeed overcome it. And if you are suffering under a genuine conflux of negative narratives, I hope that you may be able to push back on them yourself. Perception is the first step. Good luck. Report back.
Professor?
Yes?
I happen to see time as a flat circle.
Is that so? Yes, go on. If you would like to hear my entire conversation with teaching assistant Sheila, it will be available in full over on the Patreon. That is just one of the many tidbits of extra information that you get over there. So I hope that you join us over there for a little more lively chatter, a little back and forth, a little intellectual stimulation. Let us see what our next question is. Yes. Matt D. Matt, I have been looking forward to addressing one of your comments in the chats for some time because I always find your comments extremely thoughtful, well thought out, and very academically intelligent. And I appreciate the thought that you clearly put into them, so I'm excited to address this here. Matt D. asks, the Romans called the zodiac the Rota Fortunae, or Wheel of Fortune. Fortuna being the goddess of chance, she was also a goddess of sailing, with one of her symbols being the ship's rudder. Since blind chance steers fate at sea, wheels were not initially used for steering cars, but the initial common solution was a tiller, as used in small boats. But when Americans use the new expression, Jesus take the wheel, what exactly do they mean? Are they really evoking Jesus or something else? Matt, you have consistently posted very high-quality content on this channel, and this comment continues the illustrious tradition. For this reason, I am awarding you an A+. The true origins of the phrase in question are murky. However, the popularization and wide dissemination of this phrase have a clear source. The song Jesus Take the Wheel by Carrie Underwood. I find Carrie Underwood a strange choice for the dissemination of a Christian cliché. She was launched into stardom in the 2005 season of American Idol, a show whose name is so glaringly blasphemous. I have always been puzzled to find its popularity so far-reaching in a nation still supposedly quite religious. Her debut song was Inside Your Heaven, a song of religious tone that does not seem addressed to a Christian God. The song repeats the phrase, the sun and the moonlight, frequently, and references storms and the earth that holds you. These titans of nature are pillars of ancient pagan religion, and so too the line, when we touch, when we love, the stars line up. These nature worship and astrological themes put Miss Underwood's religious position in a quite unclear place. The song was simultaneously released by her co-contestant on American Idol, Bo Bice. The B-side to his single was a cover of the 1974 song Vehicle. This song celebrates the Men in Black with the opening lyric, "I'm a friendly stranger in a black sedan. Won't you hop inside my car? I got pictures, got candy, I'm a lovable man, and I can take you to the nearest star." The only other lyric with any content to it describes a sort of Faustian bargain where the Men in Black offers fame to the addressee of the song, an offer, perhaps, familiar to these contestants of American Idol from personal experience. We also have a parallel here between the song Vehicle and the song Jesus Take the Wheel, a sort of automotive theme. But the authoritarian tone of the Men in Black, whether quote-unquote friendly or not, is decidedly different from Matt's suggestion regarding Fortuna. Fortuna represents the anarchic chaos of chance, whereas the Men in Black represent the oppressive fascistic structures. Whoever is driving the car, though, the two American Idols seem to be in agreement. It ought not to be the human subject. This brings us to our most vocal pupil, Samuel McCandless. McCandless, what are we to do with you? You have sent us no less than 10 questions during this period. I'm afraid that I have no choice but to do a... lightning round. McCandless asks, do you think the Titanic was an inside job? Supposedly there was a switch between the Titanic and its sister ship, the Olympic, in order to cement an insurance payout. I do find it quite convenient that the ship named after the group that are consigned to the deepest hell, i.e. the Titans, as opposed to the Olympians, is the one assigned to the Tartarian depths of the sea. McCandless asks, was the terrorist attack on 9/11/01 foretold in the movies Back to the Future? McCandless here refers to a YouTube video from 2015, which is extremely convincing. I recommend it heartily. Is there another timeline where the warning from Zemeckis' oeuvre was followed and the disaster averted? This, to me, is a more satisfying conclusion than the one that the video posits, which is that 9/11 caused a mass transcendence event. This seems manifestly false to me, as we are now even more tightly bound in the mind-forged manacles than we were in the previous millennium. McCandless asks, Professor, where did Dianetics really come from? According to Arnie Lerma, a Scientology researcher, it was largely plagiarized from a book called Battle for the Mind by William Sargent. McCandless asks, was Walt Disney in a cult? Walt, as a young man, was in a teenage fraternal organization called Demolay International. This organization is a bit of a feeder into the Freemasons and is named after the founder of the Knights Templar. In certain official Mickey Mouse comic strips, it is also revealed that Mickey and his friends are members of this organization as well. I think that it is interesting the ambiguity with which Demolay International describes their religious beliefs. They are dedicated to a quote-unquote higher power, though they don't specify which power that is. Moreover, they list their religious devotion in their 7 precepts as reverence for sacred things, a peculiarly materialist and, dare I say, magical perspective. Was Walt in a cult? Likely. McCandless asks, I feel like the music videos for Blood and Rockets and Masters of the Sun have occult subliminal messages. What do you think? I believe that you are referring to the first video from the Masters of the Sun Volume 1 album, Back to Hip Hop. To me it seems that it employs run-of-the-mill Egyptian iconography, but I do not see much deeper than that here. However, Blood and Rockets is another matter. The premise of this video seems to be that Parsons is using the rockets as some sort of phallic way, and space is figured as a sort of cosmic womb, Given Parsons' known occult connections, this seems likely. However, this begs the question, what was the result of this insemination? A matter worthy of serious consideration. McCandless asks, Professor, should Christmas be celebrated on 9/11? McCandless, you stumped me. My tentative answer is no, but I have no idea to what you're referring here, and am interested to hear a little more detail. Lightning round over. Thank you for your questions, McCandless. I'm not sure if in the future I'll be holding lightning rounds or simply do a deep dive on an individual question, but this has been an entertaining and worthy experiment for the time being. I truly do appreciate your continued input and the vigor with which you are engaging with the topics of interest to me and we. Thank you again. That's it for this week, my students. Thank you for joining us. Please remember to like and subscribe and to hit the alarm bell for notifications when a new video arises. If you would like to have your own questions answered here in 2 weeks' time, please submit it in the comments to this video. And if you would like to guarantee that your question be addressed, as well as gaining access to additional writings and insights, please join us over on the Patreon. That's patreon.com/Bulwer. Everyone knows how to spell Bulwer, so I'm not getting into that this week. We have reached the end of our Crash Test Dummies series, and so for the next while we will be sticking to office hours videos only, and that every 2 weeks. My next project will be a series of updates to our Emoji and Max Headroom series before opening a new line of inquiry in some sort of matter of months, most likely. Thank you for being here with us, and until next time, may you bask in the sun of wisdom, just as do our reptile overlords.